Let us pray. Lord, grant us to hear, learn, and inwardly digest your word, the one that you've got for us in this moment, in this place, so that in us will be born a hope that will never die, even to the end of our lives, but will carry us all together to the end of this age and on into the next, one day at a time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So, throughout my childhood, up until I graduated from high school, I attended a non-denominational church with my grandparents, eventually also with my parents and my brother. Now, this church is called Christian Faith Church, and it's in the great deep southern state of Alabama. This is a 3 services a week, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, 3 hours of service kind of church. Everyone at this church had a deep, deep love of the Bible. But there were some select passages that they really loved. Most of them were about the apocalypse, the end times, the end of days. I was taught by them, and let's face it, by the Left Behind books and movies, to look for the signs of the apocalypse, of Christ's second coming in the world around me. And so I did. One night, sitting in the back seat of the car on the way home from youth group, I sleepily glanced out the window, and my heart almost stopped when I saw that the moon was orange. I couldn't think of anything but Acts 2:20, which says that the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and glorious day of the Lord comes, which itself is a quotation from the book of Joel. Now, I know what you're thinking. Orange is not red. But I thought maybe it would be a gradual thing, that it would slowly make its way to red. So I got really worried. I got really worried every time it was anything but pale white. I had lots of instances like this. After I was old enough to drive, I drove myself home from school every day. One day I got back home, I walked from my car to the house and let myself in, like always. I set my books down and I called for my parents. I didn't get a response, so I did some investigating, and sure enough, no one was home. And I was convinced that my family had been raptured, taken up into the clouds with Jesus, and that I had been left behind. Now, I tell these 2 stories because our readings today talk about these end times, these future events, and I will never be able to talk about the Christian future without these experiences from my childhood in my mind. They live deep in my soul. And since I've grown up and shared them with friends, I've realized that I am far from the only one to be frightened by the concept of what some Christian traditions call the apocalypse or the rapture. It turns out, though, that I'm in good company. In today's gospel, Jesus, after telling some of his disciples that there would be a day when not a stone of the temple would be left upon another, tells them about when they can expect to see that happen and how to tell. His first 2 instructions for them are to beware of people that claim to be him and who say that the time for these things is at hand, and not to be afraid. Which means, of course, that he knows that they are scared out of their minds. Then, in order to calm their fears, he reads them a litany of their future persecutions and eventual deaths. I'm not certain that it worked too much. I mean, this section of Scripture doesn't end with, and the disciples were no longer afraid and were totally calm about their future deaths. In fact, right after our reading today, Jesus continues to describe the apocalypse. Amid all that chaos, though, he ends by giving them a promise. Not a hair on your head will perish, and you will gain your souls by endurance. In a happy turn of events, our Old Testament reading today from Isaiah also talks about a future event, a future act of God. And contrary to sometimes what we're normally used to hearing in the Old Testament, it sounds really lovely. The vision we find there is of God creating new heavens and a new earth, of God delighting in his people, of God blessing them with long lives and houses they can live in, plants they can eat. They won't cry anymore. God will answer them before they call. That's a vision of the future I can get behind. So, the lectionary today gives us two visions of the future. In the midst of Luke's chaotic vision, we get a promise from Christ of protection and salvation. In Isaiah, we get a promise of new creation. However, I can't help but ask myself, so what? What am I going to do with this knowledge about the future, with the knowledge of these promises? And I believe our epistle today might have an answer for us. 2 Thessalonians is a letter all about the end times. In it, the author is trying to correct the popular and insidious belief that the second coming of Christ has already happened. So, in the letter, he assures them that it has not happened and describes what he believes that it will look like. Then, as we see in today's reading, he shifts from talking about the future to talking about the present. The specific details of what he's commanding in this passage are difficult, to say the least. But his general point holds true. He's trying to get the Thessalonians to live and to work for today, in the present moment. What do we do then with the knowledge of the future that we're given in Luke and Isaiah? We can't live in the future, but what we can do is let this knowledge of tomorrow make us mindful of today. This is really the whole point of the gospel. Christ resurrects with a glorified body and promises that we too will be raised up in the same way at his second coming. So we don't have to worry about it. We don't have to be afraid. Death, this great unknown that has been conquered by Christ. So instead of worrying about what's going to happen, we can let God's promises of protection, salvation, and new creation comfort us and give us the confidence and boldness to work today to manifest God's love in the world. We can feed the hungry. We can clothe and house the poor and homeless. We can visit the sick and those in prison. As members of God's whole creation, we can treat the good earth and our fellow creatures with kindness and dignity. There are so many better things to do than worry about death. Let's worry about life. Amen.
Amen. Amen.